Hello, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connect. Each of us has stories that help us to understand and to explain our world. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who have had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who have had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories that help us to better understand our world. And they help us to connect with each other. And Community Connections is about those people and about their stories. And I'm sure that you will enjoy meeting these amazing, amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and today's guest is a man who has had a profoundly, profoundly positive influence on the development of our community. He's done that as a volunteer in many different roles. He's done that as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of White Rock, and he's also done that as the Mayor. Welcome, Wayne Baldwin.
Good, thanks, Gord.
Thank you so much for being here. So can you tell us a little bit about growing up, about your education, and how you ended up in BC and eventually in White Rock?
Well, that covers a lot of territory. Growing up, I was born in Saskatoon. And from the time that I was born until the time I was in grade 4, we had moved 11 times.
Wow.
My parents were not wealthy, to say the least. We mostly lived, I think, in secondary suites, as far as I can remember, until 1955, when we moved to Kitimat. But the early days were Saskatoon when I was a kid or a baby, and then Montreal for a little while, and then Vancouver up until grade 3, with a brief time in Nanaimo. I attended grade 1 in Nanaimo. Actually, kindergarten as well, but I flunked out of kindergarten. So I was a kindergarten dropout. So we moved up to Kitimat, and that was the start of a major change. And it was interesting looking through in those days. Kitimat was just being constructed, and it was pretty frontierish, shall we say. The school I attended, Smelterside Elementary, had 3 classrooms up to grade 6. So my classroom was grade 4, 5, and 6 in one room, and there was 40 some odd kids in the class. We had 2 or 3 that didn't speak English. We had a wide range of kids from various backgrounds. Some were from the wealthiest families, and some were from the poorest families. And we had one boy who was a deaf mute and could read lips, sort of. So for the teacher at that time, it was an extremely difficult role to play. But nonetheless, we flourished. Surprisingly enough, we wouldn't meet any of the markers of today's classrooms or anything like that, but we did. And it all worked out in the end. So we lived in the what was called the smelter site for the first 3 years, which was a bunch of prefab homes thrown together. And most of them were built in a week, less than a week. And no insulation to speak of, really poor heating, 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, very, very small, very sparse, but everybody was close. It was an extremely social place to grow up. Then we moved up to the town site, and that was where my parents acquired their first home, the only home they ever owned, actually, in the town site area, and I went to high school there. So Mount Elizabeth Secondary School, which was built by Alcan. And Alcan had done an awful lot of town planning. They had employed the best planners, who at that time all came from England, and laid out this planned town site, which was pretty cool, except that the planners had obviously never been to Kitimat and had no idea what the weather was going to be like. So we would get normally about 20 feet of snow a year. And they had flat roofed homes frequently, which didn't work well because the kids all had to go up on the roof and shovel the snow off so the roofs didn't collapse. There was, when I first moved to Kitimat, I looked at a power line just outside our house, and there was a sign at the top of it that said, "Do not touch the wires." Are you kidding me? Well, I'm not going to climb up there. And in the winter, I found out why it said, "Do not touch the wires." You could actually walk along the power lines with the wires under your armpit, and
Wow.
it wasn't hard. So we got a lot of snow and we got a lot of rain. But what they did make up for it was they planned a high school that was absolutely state of the art, and they hired some extremely good teachers, and we had some great times in those classes with, again, a mix of kids from all backgrounds, all languages. There were Portuguese kids, there were German kids, there were French kids, there were English kids, Scottish, Italians, and so on. So it was quite a multicultural background. And one would think that since most of them came over after the war, that there would be some ill feelings. But there was none of that. It was amazing. There was no ill feeling, except on the soccer field. The soccer field, they had men's teams that were divided by country. So the Italians would play the Germans and the Portuguese would play the Italians. And some of those games got pretty physical, shall we say. And since there were no grass fields, they got pretty rough. It was all on gravel. So it was a kind of a fun time to grow up and an interesting time. And since we got so much snow, the sport of choice was basketball. So we all played basketball. And that was a lot of fun. We had a good team and did pretty good. And in order to play anybody, we had to travel. So we would travel to Terrace and Prince Rupert primarily. The zone tournaments were Terrace, Prince Rupert, Kitimat, Hazelton, Masset, Ocean Falls. Remember Ocean Falls?
Yeah.
They had a team that was pretty good. Sandy Gilchrist of the national swim team was on the team, and a few others. So we would participate in our tournament, and the winner would go down to Vancouver. And the toughest team of all was Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert always did well. And in my second last year on the team in high school, we played Prince Rupert for the championship, and they won. And then they went down to Vancouver and won the provincials.
Was John Olson playing for them then?
No, John had left by then. The biggest player they had on the team was Kenny Shields.
Oh,
who
Ken
became
Shields.
the coach for
You bet. Yeah.
And Kenny was my guard. I looked after. I had to keep him down below 10 points. That was the big challenge. So they did extremely well to win the championship, with the tallest player being, I think Ken might have been 6'1", 6'2", something like that.
Yeah.
And that was pretty something. So we had a lot of good times then, and made some really good friends. The school, as I said, was advanced, so we had the kind of like French language labs with individual booths and tape recorders and that sort of thing, which no one else had. We also were accredited to have grade 13, which was the only place in northern BC to have it. So we had kids that would come to Kitimat for grade 13, which was the equivalent of first year university. So the school decided they were going to try an experimental program. So they're going to do an advanced program. So the deal was that for grade 10, 11, and 12, we would do that in 2 years. So I was chosen along with about 16, 17 others to do this program. And we did extra classes after school and so on, and did the 3 years in two, which was interesting. And I'm not really sure what we accomplished other than we graduated a year early than everybody else. Other than that, no, I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. And I lost a year of basketball out of it, so that was no fun. But I did attend grade 13 along with the others. But we had a really accomplished little group, and some of them did extremely well. One of them was Doug Whitehead, who became CEO and chairman of the board of Finning Tractor, who Vin Coyne worked for. We had Les Harris, who became CEO of West Tech, and West Tech was the sort of the computer arm of BC Hydro. Eric Harris, who was his brother and became founding partner of Harris & Co., one of the top law firms in Vancouver. We had Bruce Montador, who became, Bruce was a financial economic genius. He was Director General of International Trade and Finance for Finance Canada, and became Chief Financial Chief of Financial Markets for the Bank of Canada. So that was from a group of like 12 kids that went to the end of the course together. So we did exceptionally well, and it was a good training for the rest of my life. So after that, we looked at, okay, university. Well, I applied to a couple of places, McGill, University of Saskatchewan, UBC, and I thought about RMC, so I applied to that one and got accepted at all of them. But RMC had the unique distinction of no tuition fees. And since my family was not very well off and could give me no financial help, that seemed like a good idea. So went to RMC. I got paid to go, got all my tuition fees paid for, my uniforms covered, and all the rest of it. So that was seemed like a good option. So I thought RMC would be all right, a good fit, and they have a big sports program. So I thought that would be good. I can do this. So I wasn't quite prepared for the military side. That caught me by surprise. But I learned how to make a bed, and I learned how to shine my boots and press my clothes and get up at 5:30 every morning and all these things. And it was a lot of work, but it was good. Played a lot of sports. Went on the track team and did that, and we had a pretty good track team. So I was doing the half mile and quarter mile, and I was pretty good shape, but that took me to another level. Remember, our warm-ups were run by a guy by the name of Wally Travis, and Wally Travis was a sergeant, and he and another sergeant and they ran the Toronto Maple Leafs training camp, spring training camp. And when they got back to RMC, they took it out on us. So we had workouts that were unbelievable. Most guys would end up sick by the time the workout was finished. And it was pretty hard. But you got in good shape. And then we had basketball. And we had some good teams in those first couple of years I was there. We had nobody taller than 6'3", but we lost to no one except Carleton. Carleton was the only team that could beat us. But we'd beat University of Ottawa, Sherbrooke, Bishops, University of Montreal, Concordia, Sir George Williams, Loyola. So and those were all our competitions, and had the odd game against Syracuse University down in the States and Jefferson Community College, and we always did well. So it was a lot of fun. But I found out in thinking about it later that we had one guy on staff at RMC, Major Danny McLeod, who was the head of the PT department, and he was recruiting kids, made sure that the kids who went to RMC were good athletes. And so he recruited some really good ones. One of our guys on our team was Dave Dorman, who was became the Canadian decathlon champ for the Olympics. And he played guard on our team. He was 6'3", but he could jump like a deer. I don't know what his vertical was, but it must be like 36 or something like that. So he played about 6'8", and was only 6'3". So we had some good games, and I think we won mostly by the virtue of the fact that we ran the other team into the ground. We were in really good shape, full court press the whole game, and just ran them into the ground. So those were good times. But the other thing that Danny McLeod brought to RMC was a sense of excellence. So the teams were all really good. We would play the top competition, and he would organize, he had these contacts in the sports world with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Vancouver or Montreal Canadiens, Ottawa. He had Ottawa involved, the Ottawa Rough Riders, and so on. And he would arrange for these sports dinners, and each team would get a sports figure to come as their guest and just kind of hobnob with them. So for basketball, we had Dolph Schayes. You remember Dolph Schayes?
I remember that name, yeah.
Yeah. So he coached Philadelphia 76ers.
Yeah.
And was in the record books for the top free throw average in the NBA. Larry Costello, who later was a coach with, I forget who, 76ers perhaps. So hockey got Davy Keon and George Armstrong and Jacques Lemaire and Serge Savard. Football team got Russ Jackson, Bernie Filoni. I was amazed how small Russ Jackson was. I always thought he was a big guy. He's not a big guy. The boxing team got George Chuvalo, who turned out to be a really friendly guy, a really good public speaker, a very interesting character. And when you shook hands with him, your hand just got enveloped in this big mitt. It's quite the character. The ski team had Nancy Green. So that was the caliber of the stuff that was going on. And it was for a kid from a small town in northern BC, that was a really interesting time. So that was RMC, and I got through that with a bit of sleep and a lot of hard work. And then went on to my career in the armed forces, which was another couple of years. Went to Esquimalt as the first, I was in the engineers. So my first posting was to Esquimalt, where I was the first Army officer on the base. They didn't know what to do with me because I dressed differently from them and talked differently and knew different jargon and so on. But it was interesting time. Then I went to Penn for a year. And then I was able to get off to University of Toronto for a master's degree in engineering, specializing in water and sanitary sewer. And then, which stood me in good stead, as it turns out, in later life with the mayor's job. And then after that, went to back to RMC, and I taught there for 3 years and did some research. And I was also what they call a squadron commander, so I doubled off in the last year, which is kind of like being a house mother to about 100 cadets. And then I went to Combat Engineer Regiment, and which was at that time a field squadron in Chilliwack, and finally to base engineer in Chilliwack, which was an interesting job because we had, I looked after the entire physical plant for the base, all of the lower mainland, all of the armories. It was, I probably had about 300 people working for me, I think, in various locations. It was a big job, but a lot of fun, very interesting. Then I decided to get out of the forces and went to work for the district in North Van. So that was a big change, but it was time to move on. The postings were looking a little grim. Forces were cutting back a lot. When I joined, I think there was about 140,000 of us. By the time I got out, it was down to about 95,000, and now it's down to about 76,000. And it just shows you what, I mean, it's still trying to do the same stuff as we did with 140,000, and it's not easy. I think it's starting to show, starting to wear a bit thin. But it was time to move on. So that's when I got out. Went to, as I said, District North Van, and got a job there as a deputy engineer. And got an MBA at Simon Fraser through the executive MBA program. And then the job with District City of White Rock as a CAO. So 23 years CAO White Rock. When I started, I was the youngest by probably about 15 years in the region. By the time I finished, I wasn't.
That seems to happen somehow like that. Yeah.
Strangely enough, it works out that way.
It certainly does. So your experiences, as you described them, going through high school and all the people who you graduated with who did so well, and then on to RMC and the people that you had connections with there. So you've lived with, grown up with, participated with a lot of people who were very successful, you being one of those as well. Was there something unique about growing up in a small town that really helped that, and the sort of sense of collegiality that happened with that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Gord. I'm not sure what it was. That I think it was just that the environment that we had was very conducive to academics,
Yeah.
and generally success overall. So academics, athletic success, it honored and respected that, as well as citizenship. So they would have awards for these things and give recognition, and it kind of made you want to do things. And we had such an excellent group of teachers. They were very inspiring. The principal was very involved. The town was involved with the school. And so it encouraged you to do well. And I think a lot of the kids were from the old country, and they honored hard work. And so that reflected in it too. So it was a really good environment to grow up in. It was small enough that if you were seen out on the streets during school, before school was out, your mom knew about it before you got home. You got a phone call. Did you know that Wayne was out so and so? So no, you didn't. You tended not to do that.
When you came to White Rock, did you see some of those same small town elements when you first came here and had those type of connections? Were there some elements of that, or some things that reminded you of that?
Oh yeah, most definitely. That was one of the neat things about coming here. It was for my kids particularly, it was kind of like an opportunity for them to experience a lot of the closeness that I experienced, and was lucky enough to have with many families and many friends. So yeah, that's the parallels are many, which is one of the reasons I decided not to move on. I mean, I had some offers to go back east and so on, and I thought, I can make more money there, but I don't want to move. No.
And it wasn't I don't think it was just a job, because I know you were coaching soccer, you got involved in the Rotary Club, you were involved in many activities which are sort of the element of or the essence of what it is in a small town. And those are probably reflected from your experiences both in high school and at RMC.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that I certainly enjoyed about coming to White Rock, was the opportunity to get involved in so many community groups. Not too long after I was hired, Carmen Bueller, at that time, Alderman Bueller, said, come on down to the Rotary Club and give it a try. And so I thought, okay, I'll go down there and try that. And that got me involved in the Rotary Club, which I stayed involved with for 35 years or so, something like that. And it was a good way to give back to the community. We did lots of good community work, and people were, in those days, were really, really wanting to be involved in the community and to do good things, which was also, by the way, I think typical of what council was made up of people who sort of an obligation to the community. They're the elders of the community, the statesmen, other than some of the younger ones. Were elders anyways, and people like Vin Coyne and Lauren Ginther and so on, who wanted to give back. They weren't doing it to be recognized or anything like that. They were just wanting to, they said, hey, I've accomplished a lot in my life. This is time for me to give it back, and I will do that. So that was their goal, and that was a good example, I think, for a lot of us.
And through that course, and then becoming the mayor, you were certainly, you made reference to your engineering degree and specializing in some water treatment, and so you brought in the water treatment plant and made some big changes in White Rock, both as mayor and as chief administrative officer. What are some of the things that sort of stand out for you in terms of the accomplishments that you led both as the CAO and as mayor?
Well, I think the one that stands out the most would probably be the promenade. I've told this story before about how when I first got here, I looked at the infrastructure. And in fact, this came out during the interview. My job question that somebody asked, I forget who, says, what do you think of White Rock? Your infrastructure is really bad shape. Really bad. And then when I got a whole look at the financial, like I said, oh my God, we're on the verge of bankruptcy. There's no capital program. There's no effort to do it. It's just kind of like living hand to mouth. And we would kind of bring in the taxes and then run it out till around about December, and then look at it and say, well, how much have we got left? Because you weren't allowed to go into negative cash flow. Okay, let's lay off about 30 people and we'll make it through December, and that'll bring the budget down below the level. We won't be overspent. And that's no way to run a ship. So we had to make some good changes, and council was very supportive of the financial changes we made. It did take a little bit of work, but we got there, and we started the infrastructure program. But one of the things was the promenade, and we were going down there and looking at the tracks that people were walking on. There weren't that many trains in the day, but it was pretty dangerous. And there'd be lots of people down there just walking along the track, and a train would come along and they'd all jump off. And oh God, this is an accident waiting to happen. We got to do something about this. So I talked with some of the staff, and we thought, well, maybe we can build a promenade or a walkway beside the tracks and kind of encourage them. It's easier to walk on the sidewalk than it would be on the ties, because the ties are scientifically designed to not fit anybody's stride. So I thought, okay, we can do this. We took it to council, and finally we persuaded council, based on, I think, safety was the big thing, that let's try this. So did the first little section from about the station down to the pier. Cost about $100,000, and council said, that's a lot of money. I don't know. I want to put that much money into it. Can you cheapen it out a bit and maybe just put in gravel or something? I said, no, maybe it should look really good. And let's start it off with brickwork and see how that works. And so council said, okay, let's do this. So we found the money and went along with it. And then there was a lot of protests. You were mayor at the time, and there was a lot of pushback. People were, oh, you're going to ruin the environment. You're going to ruin the feeling of White Rock and all this stuff. And it was so negative. But once we got it done,
Yeah, I remember that because I remember the Chamber of Commerce was so angry with us because they thought we were going to take all the business from front of their places to the waterfront, and therefore they were going to lose out. And I
Yeah,
also remember you arranged for me to meet with I think he was the vice president in charge of the Burlington Northern for Western United States. And I went out for dinner with him, and I remember him saying to me, "You've got to know that nowhere in the railway world do we encourage people walking next to a track." And remember, you and I had talked about it beforehand, and so I said what we had talked about. I said, "Well, I guess you've got a couple of choices. You could cordon it all off so that nobody can get on it, and then you'll become the pariah of the community, or you can leave it the way it is." And as you say, you had given me pictures of people walking along there all the time. So then they said they were going to give it a little bit of a try, I think down to Vital. And I think we as a city had more money. And I think with your blessing, we went further without their permission. And then they thought it was a good idea. So I think
yeah, we proved that. We
yeah, you
proved it out.
certainly did. Yeah, you led that well, extremely well. So
So that
that's,
was a good project.
yeah.
And then following that, I think one of the interesting things was to remember that the old A&W lot that we owned down opposite, not quite the WAG, but
Yeah.
down in that area opposite Semiahmoo Park, and the city owned it, where we used to do the burning of Christmas, which was a bit of a zoo. But we had that lot, so we thought, well, maybe if we sell that lot, we can use the money for some other useful purpose. And that was when Lars Hansen, a former NBA basketball player, came and met with us and had this proposal. So we went along with it. It wasn't an easy sell again, but sold that land off, and then subsequently used that money to buy a chunk of land that was. I had talked with a developer who owned the bottom end of what is now Centennial Park, Dupree Ravine. And he wanted to recreate a condominium project that was in there. There was an old hotel or motel in Dupree Ravine that was ruined with a landslide. And he'd bought the land and thought he could put in a multifamily unit in there. And I said, no. There's not going to be any multifamily in that ravine. The council will not go for that. It's too dangerous. The soil's unstable. No, I'm afraid not. And he said, well, I've got something I can't sell then. I said, well, we could buy it off you. So went back to council and said, we want to do this and we can see if we can get it down. So we got it. I forget how much we paid for it, but something like $200,000. But that formed half of Centennial Park, what is now Centennial Park. And so that was a really good buy, and far better use than a condominium project that would have self-destructed in a few years. So we got that one going, and there was, do you remember the old fire hall? That was about where, what would it be? I suppose the White Spot. And it was an old house. The chief lived upstairs, and there was a 3-bay garage that the fire trucks really didn't fit in very well. Not heated. And they had to stop traffic in order to get out and get in if there was a call. It was just falling apart. So finally we approached council and said, we think we can do this. We'll have to borrow some money, which was a bad word in those days. You don't borrow money. We can pay it back in 5 years, and there's a way to do this financially and so on. So we showed out how it could be done. Okay, we can, all right, let's try this. And so we built the fire hall after first buying all the properties that were behind the city hall on Pacific and making room for it. So that turned out to be a good move.
Sure. Yeah.
And there are a few other things that happened that we really took care of. And I think all in all, I think what else was there? Oh, the museum. I was watching your interview with Vin Coyne and was reminded of the museum, how it was in the old post office building. And took all 3 floors with the McCall Nelson collection. And we had, it was a bunch of stuff.
A lot of
Nothing-
Semiahmoo First Nation stuff there too.
There was a fair amount of that. Yeah. 1 floor almost of it. But a lot of eclectic things. But the feds sold the building out from under us. And so the museum was left with no place to go. So we arranged with Don Carr to use his old used car lot, or car lot, it wasn't a car, used car, and garage. And Don allowed us to move the museum temporarily into there. So Lorraine Ellenwood kind of took it on and kept the thing going until we could find a home for them. Because at that time, the White Rock Arts Society was using the station, and we couldn't just boot them out. So we had to wait until they were ready to move. And when the time came, we moved them down to the museum after first moving the station back a bit. So that was a bit of preserving history that took a little bit of time, but it worked out okay. I think the other thing that we did was we really made White Rock's finances solid. And we got reserves that we'd never had. There were no reserves when we first started, nothing. So if you were going to buy a fire truck, my God, you either had to hike taxes or cut everything else out to replace the fire truck. But now we had reserves. Things could be purchased in a logical and well-planned manner. And we got it all going. So we moved things along considerably.
So a couple of things I'd like. You didn't talk about when you met Jane and where you met Jane and the family from there. Just interested, was that after RMC or?
No, it was at RMC actually. And
Was it?
my second year, we had to play sports all the time. So when it wasn't track season and it wasn't basketball season, I would do another sport. So the sport I did was football. So I was in my second year, I was looking for a date, and my friend Danny Nolan, who was on the team with me, said, "I'll get you a date. My girlfriend knows some kids from Kingston, and we can get you something lined up." So, okay. So he got me a name and a number, and I phoned up this young lady. I sold my football gear, talking on the phone, and I said, "So I understand." I was really smooth. I understand you want to go with an RMC cadet.
Great line.
Oh, it was very, very smooth. Anyways, fortunately, she said yes, and so I thought, okay. I'll come pick you up on Saturday, and we'll go to the Queen's University Sadie Hawkins dance. And so she said, okay. So I went there and picked her up, and she lived in the Armories at Kingston. I had to hike up about 20 floors of stairs, it felt like, and got up there and met her, and she was beautiful. I thought, wow. This is great. This is great. So we're into the Sadie Hawkins dance, and one of the first things we did was we went to see Mary and Sam. Remember Mary and Sam from Little Abner?
Oh,
He
yes.
was the guy who did the marriage. He was the preacher. So he married us. So I thought that was a foretell of things to come. But we had a good time, and so that was the beginning of the end.
Or the beginning of another beginning.
So that was second year university. We got married after graduation, a year after graduation. And I was posted in Esquimalt, and Jane was going to Queens. So we didn't have any money, and we got married in Kingston. She had to organize it all because I was not able to get any time off, and so I flew out there on an armed forces flight, and we got married. And a day later, we flew back on a Hercules. we were in with, she was a great trooper because we were sitting in the jump seats 2 days after being married, and she had her feet up on a Jeep. And we flew like that in a hurt for, I don't know, it was a slow flight, a local flight from, I think we flew to Edmonton and went up to visit her brother for our honeymoon in the married quarters at Cold Lake. We stayed married.
Well, that's a great story.
It was pretty grim, I tell you. It was super cheap, but that's what we did. So.
That's a great story. So we're getting close to our time, but so as you're looking at the city now and the development and the growth of the city, what is your hopes for the future of the city, and where do you think if somebody's watching this 50 years from now, if you were to be a prognosticator, what would you like it to see it, and how can it be built and at the same time manage some of the things you've referred to in terms of the values of the community?
Well, that's a really good question because it seems like we go from no growth to growth, no growth to growth, depending on who's on council. The fact of the matter is that White Rock is a very popular place. We have a great community and a great location, a great climate, and it beckons people to come here. So it's very popular. The demand is high. And if you have a high demand and a limited supply, as we do in housing, it's going to drive prices up. So what you have to do is either draw the line and say, nobody's coming in here, and it would drive the prices sky high, or you kind of recognize the fact that, well, you got to accommodate some growth. How best do we accommodate it? And my way of thinking was that I thought, well, if we're going to accommodate it, let's accommodate it in the town center and build up there, but preserve the single family as much as we can, because that's a unique part of White Rock that I would certainly hate to see lose, and a lot of people would too. So you have to recognize that the only way to do it is with greater density in the town center, and then leave the outskirts intact. And I think that's where we have to go with it. I can't see us doing anything more. On the other hand, our growth has generally been really controlled and small. There's a spurt now because a lot of stuff was approved by the previous councils, and it's just now coming to fruition, which gives us a great tax base. But there's a lot of building going on right now, which also means a lot of restoration and some improvement in terms of services and so on. So there are payoffs and there are costs, and you have to deal with both. So the trick is to balance the two, and that's not easy. And I think it's going to be a source of conflict, but the current council is one that's not growth. So we'll give it some time to settle down, and then things will happen again. But I think probably we're looking at maybe 25,000, 26,000, something like that. And that will pretty well cap it out, because you can't really go without changing the character. And I just don't see changing the character. I think that where we're headed right now is generally not bad. Some stuff happened I didn't like, but basically it's pretty good. And, you know, I'm always reminded of an incident that happened back in the, when was it? The 90s, I guess. We were contemplating some development in the town center. I think it was that 9-story building outside of White Rock Square. And this was an atrocious thing to happen in those days. People were very unhappy with it. And our former planner, Dan Chincheski, was running a meeting, a public meeting that was quite well attended. There were probably about, I don't know, maybe 125 people there, something like that, 150. And so Dan was getting a little exasperated with the very negative tone of the speakers. And so finally, he just kind of said, put it on pause and said, look, I just want to do a little exercise. So he said, everybody stand up. So the whole group stood up and he said, okay, now all of you who have been here for 5 years or less, sit down. So about half of the people sat down. He said, now, those of you who've been here for 10 years or less, sit down. And about half the remainder sat down. And he said, those of you who have been here for longer than 15 years remain standing. And that left about 30 people or something like that, 20 people. And then he said, okay, now all of you guys who are sitting there, you realize that if the people who were still standing had said no to development, none of you would be here. And they kind of, oh, yeah, never thought of that. So that for me was always an abject lesson in people thinking and how they, as soon as they're here, they don't want things to change. Yeah. But up until then, everything's fine. But once they're here, don't change it. Don't change it because I like it. That's why I moved here. But things do change. And I think we have to be the controllers of change, not the victims of it. And that's not easy to do sometimes. Not easy to do.
No, that's a giant challenge, and every council goes through some version of that, and all of us who live here go through some version of that at different times as well. But I was at that meeting when Dan did that, and it was a very profound statement that he made by doing that.
It was a powerful moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly was. Yeah. So any final words you have, Wayne, for people who might be looking at this 20 years or 30 years from now?
Yeah, the water's good.
The water is great. Yes. Thank you for that.
We, buying the utility from EPCOR was one of the best things I ever did. I think pushing that through. It had to happen. It was becoming obscene, the amount of money they were making off the backs of the taxpayers. And because EPCOR was given the right by the province to get 10.25% return on their investment, which it wasn't only their investment, but was the investment of all the developers who had to put in the water mains that we required in order to do the development, which was then handed over to EPCOR. They were able to get returns on that. And when they started that total water quality management plan, that was going to be 11.5 million.
Yeah.
We were going to get 10.25% on 11.5 million bucks a year. That was going to go to Edmonton to help their property taxes. And that was the time we said, no, enough is enough is enough. We've got to do this ourselves. They were also kind of turning their backs on the problems with the arsenic and manganese. We said, well, we'll do it, maybe when we have to. But we're not going to be proactive about this. And so we said, no, we have to be proactive. We have to do this. It's the right thing to do. So we're going to buy it. And they were reluctant to go into it. But we actually threatened expropriation. And then they said, oh, well, okay, so we'll get into it. So we ended up getting that, buying that for 13.7 million, I think. Did all the total water quality, increased the reservoir capacity by quite a bit, by 1.5 million liters, I think it was. And upgraded a lot of the water mains, which were well undersized. Remember when back in the old days, they had water mains that were like 1 inch, and the minimum you're supposed to put in is 6. It was bizarre. But anyway, that wasn't EPCOR's fault. It was the privately owned utility for 100 years. So you had to expect that kind of thing. But yeah, it was a lot of work, and we got it through. And then thanks to your support and the support of others, that we got that grant that cut the cost of manganese and arsenic removal down to about $2 million. So we got the whole thing for about 15 million. And that was including the advanced treatment. Now, people have always said, well, why didn't you just join up with Surrey? Well, it wasn't that easy. In fact, I think there's some notion that you could simply open a couple of connections and just turn the taps and away you'd go. Well, no, you cannot do that. We had to build a couple of mains quite a ways and build a reservoir out in Sunnyside and put another main in. So the whole cost was going to be something in the order of 30 million bucks to join Metro. Plus then we would have had to pay for the water, which right now we get for free. So the costs would have been out of this world. Plus it would have taken twice as long.
Yeah.
It was going to take 4 years and we could do it in 2. So no, this is the right way to go. Let's do it ourselves. So we did it ourselves and turned out to be controversial, but the right thing to do. And
I think everybody now, as usually happens later on, they understand and accept and how important that was and how valuable it was. And
Yep.
it was the right thing to do. But as you say, sometimes people aren't aware of that until sometime after.
Promenade 2.0.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Wayne. That's been most informative and engaging, and it's much appreciated. If there is there anything that we've missed that you wanted to highlight in the last couple of minutes we have?
No, just, well, I the opportunities that I had to get involved with the community were really, really good. You mentioned soccer, coaching soccer. So I coached boys and girls soccer. I coached girls fast pitch. I coached boys baseball, track and field, basketball a little bit. All those things were fun. Was on the executive of the Peace Arch Soccer Club in the early days. Chaired the committee that built the what would you call it? Not exactly a field house, but a small
Rotary
building
field
down at the baseball fields and overlooking the football field, and then the Rotary field house as well.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge, building that Rotary field house, but it was a really good project, and we did it. Brought a lot of good things to the community, and really solidified the South Surrey area as one that was a center for athletics and sports. I think the other thing that I'm proud of was back in when we were redoing rebuilding the Players Club, and the Rotary Club took on the lead role in fundraising for that. And I decided that I'd had enough with the field house, so I wasn't going to do the Players Club too. But nonetheless, I was involved, and there was an opportunity because Boza was going to do Miramar Village. So I had a chat with Dale Boza and said, it would be really good for the community if you could donate some money to the Players Club, because that project is short, probably about $250,000 right now. And if you could donate that, that would do really well for the Boza community. Yeah. And so he thought it over and came back and said, yeah, sure. So he kicked in $250,000, and that made that project come through. But the thing that really disappointed me about that particular incident was that at the end of the day, they didn't recognize that. And Dale and Boza were not even invited to the opening. And that, to me, was a really great shame. It was a big donation. We didn't have to do it. Yeah. There's no requirement to do it at all. They just wanted to contribute to the community in a meaningful way. And but he did, and the name is there, and the building stands, and it's a great contribution to the community. So that's something that I was pretty proud of.
Yeah, and so you should be. Wayne, the contributions you've made to this community and the time you spent here are monumental, and our gratitude to you and to Jane for putting up with you through that whole process.
That was
After describing your honeymoon and your first date, I have even greater esteem for Jane in that process. So thank you so very much for being a guest on Community Connections.
Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.